The grinding sound of plasma cutters and the acrid smell of fused metal had become Mike Wrench Thompson's version of a lullaby over his 8 years at Forward Operating Base Titan. His workshop occupied what used to be a storage bay, now crammed with salvaged parts, jury-rigged repair equipment, and the accumulated detritus of keeping human military hardware functional on a planet that seemed actively hostile to anything more complex than a rock. Another day, another impossible repair job, Wrench muttered to his assistant, Corporal Lisa Park, as she handed him a diagnostic scanner that was held together with plasma tape and optimism. "What's the damage report this morning?" 3 hover tanks with fried repulsor coils, 2 atmospheric processors making sounds that definitely aren't in their technical manuals, and a coffee machine that's achieved sentience and is refusing to make anything stronger than weak tea, Park replied cheerfully. "Oh, and we have a visitor." Wrench looked up from the plasma cutter's power coupling he'd been troubleshooting to see a figure standing in the workshop's entrance that made him question whether the recycled air filters needed maintenance. The Kithrani warrior was tall even by her species standards, probably close to 6.5 feet, with the kind of predatory grace that suggested she could kill him in about 15 different ways before he could reach for a wrench. Her most striking feature wasn't the pointed ears that marked her alien heritage or the intricate tattoos that spiraled down her arms in patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. It was her armor, a masterpiece of biometallic engineering that flowed over her form like liquid mercury, every surface etched with designs that probably told the story of battles fought across multiple star systems. "You are the human they call Wrench?" she asked, her voice carrying the musical overtones of Kithrani speech but with an edge that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. "That's me," Wrench replied, setting down his tools and trying to project casual competence instead of the mild panic that always accompanied unexpected visits from heavily armed aliens. "Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, chief mechanic for this particular corner of organized chaos. What can I do for you?" The Kithrani warrior stepped into the workshop with fluid movements that made no sound on the metal deck plating. "I am Vera of the Silent Ridge clan. I require repairs to my armor." Wrench studied the intricate suit, noting the way it seemed to respond to her movements like a living thing. "What kind of damage are we talking about?" Instead of answering, Vera touched a section near her left shoulder. The armor's surface shifted, revealing a jagged tear that exposed the complex circuitry beneath. Bioluminescent filaments sparked intermittently, and Wrench could see where someone had attempted crude field repairs that only made the problem worse. "Plasma weapon discharge," she explained tersely. "The self-repair systems are damaged. It no longer responds properly to neural commands." Wrench moved closer to examine the damage, his professional interest overriding his awareness that he was within striking distance of someone who could probably bench press a hover tank. "This is incredible work," he said, studying the armor's construction. "I've never seen biometallic interfaces this sophisticated. The neural feedback system alone must have taken decades to grow." "Centuries," Vera corrected, her voice carrying a note that might have been pride. "This armor has been worn by 12 generations of my bloodline. Each wearer adds to its capabilities, strengthening the bond between warrior and protection." "And you're trusting a human mechanic to work on something that irreplaceable?" Wrench asked, suddenly very aware of the magnitude of what she was asking. Vera's expression shifted to something that might have been vulnerability, though it was hard to tell with alien facial features. "Human technology is the only compatible repair medium in this sector. Your plasma welding techniques can bond with Kithrani biometals without rejection." "That's not what I meant," Wrench said gently. "I meant, why trust me specifically? There are other mechanics on this base, people with more experience with alien tech." "I have observed your work," Vera replied after a moment's hesitation. "You repair things with care. Not merely function, but respect for the object's nature. This is necessary for armor that lives." Wrench blinked. "Lives?" "The biometallic matrix develops neural pathways over time," she explained. "It learns to anticipate its wearer's needs, responds to emotional states, provides not just protection but partnership. To repair it properly requires understanding this relationship. Right, Wrench said slowly, processing this information. So I'm not just fixing damaged equipment. I'm performing surgery on a living entity that's been bonded to your family for centuries. No pressure there. Something that might have been humor flickered across Vera's features. Indeed. No pressure. Over the next hour, Wrench set up his equipment while Vera explained the armor's basic functions. The biometallic composition required specialized tools that he had to improvise from existing equipment, and the neural interfaces needed calibration that combined technical skill with what could only be called intuition. The damaged section needs to be completely restructured, Wrench explained, showing her his analysis on a diagnostic display. I can restore the basic protective functions, but the neural responsiveness will require growing new interface pathways. That's delicate work that could take several days. Vera nodded slowly. And during this time, the armor must be removed. Well, yeah. I can't work on it while you're wearing it. Something shifted in Vera's expression, surprise, perhaps, or apprehension. You expect me to be separated from my armor? Wrench paused, suddenly realizing he might have stumbled into some kind of cultural taboo. Is that a problem? I mean, I assumed you could take it off when necessary. The armor can be removed, Vera said carefully. But it has not been separated from me for more than brief periods in over 20 years. And never in the presence of. She gestured vaguely at him and the workshop. In the presence of humans? In the presence of anyone, she corrected quietly. The admission hung in the air between them like a live wire. Wrench found himself understanding that this wasn't just about armor repair anymore, it was about trust, vulnerability, and a kind of faith that warriors didn't give lightly. Well, he said finally, I promise to take good care of it. Both the armor and the trust you're placing in me. Vera looked at him for a long moment with those intense alien eyes, as if weighing his words against some internal measure he couldn't understand. Very well, she said eventually. When do we begin? Watching Vera remove her armor was like witnessing a ritual that belonged in a museum rather than a military workshop. Each piece detached with careful precision, the biometallic surface releasing her with what almost looked like reluctance. Without the imposing bulk of the ceremonial protection, she appeared smaller, more human, though the intricate tattoos covering her arms and the predatory grace of her movements left no doubt about her lethal capabilities. The armor must remain active during repairs, she explained, connecting neural interface cables to a portable power unit. If the biometallic matrix goes dormant, it will lose the learned behavioral patterns accumulated over centuries. Wrench nodded, studying the suit now displayed on his improvised work stand. Even deactivated, the armor seemed to pulse with its own inner life, bioluminescent patterns flowing across its surface like a slow heartbeat. It's beautiful, he said honestly. I mean, from an engineering perspective. The integration of organic and synthetic materials is incredible. Each generation added their own modifications, Vera said, settling into the workshop's spare chair with the fluid grace that seemed characteristic of her species. My grandmother incorporated quantum resonance chambers. My mother developed the adaptive camouflage functions. I added enhanced strength amplifiers. And now you're letting a human mechanic poke around in your family's greatest achievement, Wrench observed, beginning his diagnostic scans. That's either really trusting or really desperate. Desperate, Vera admitted without hesitation. The damage occurred during a skirmish with raiders 3 days ago. The armor's protective functions are degrading. Without repairs, it will fail completely within a week. Wrench paused in his examination of the damaged shoulder section. Raiders? Not human forces. No. These were Kithrani extremists who view any interaction with your species as betrayal. Her voice carried a bitter edge. They have been targeting warriors who participate in the neutral zone exchanges. So you're taking a risk just being here, Wrench said, understanding beginning to dawn. Not just trusting me with your armor, but risking your life to get it repaired. The armor is my life, Vera replied simply. Without it, I am merely another exile with nowhere to go. The morning passed in careful work as Wrench mapped the armor's neural pathways and began the delicate process of removing damaged biometallic tissue. Vera watched every movement with hawk-like intensity, occasionally offering guidance about the armor's responses or warnings about particularly sensitive components. This section here, Wrench said, indicating a cluster of organic filaments near the chest plate, it's not just armor, is it? These neural pathways go deeper than protective systems. Vera's expression tightened slightly. Kithrani battle armor bonds with its wearer on multiple levels. Physical protection, enhanced reflexes, tactical awareness, emotional stabilization. Emotional stabilization. The armor helps regulate stress responses, maintains focus during combat, provides psychological support during difficult periods. She paused, watching him work. It has been my constant companion for 23 years. Wrench looked up from his delicate removal of damaged circuitry. 23 years. How old were you when you first put it on? 15, Vera replied. Young for warrior initiation, but my clan needed fighters and I showed aptitude for combat systems. So you've been bonded to this armor since you were basically a kid, Wrench said, understanding flooding through him. It's not just protective equipment. It's been your family, your support system, your identity. Vera was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. Which is why the thought of trusting its care to another is difficult. Wrench set down his micro-welder and looked at her directly. Vera, I need you to understand something. I've been repairing things since I was 12 years old. Engines, weapons, life support systems, equipment that people depend on to survive. I've never lost anything under my care, and I'm not going to start with something this important to you. Something shifted in Vera's expression, a slight softening around her eyes that might have been the beginning of trust. Your confidence is reassuring. Good, because this next part is going to require some creative problem solving, Wrench said, returning to his work. The biometallic matrix has developed some interesting adaptations over the centuries. I'm seeing neural pathways that don't match any standard Kithrani designs. The armor evolves with its wearer, Vera explained. It learns from each generation, incorporates new capabilities based on need and environment. Including emotional patterns. Especially emotional patterns. A warrior's survival often depends on split-second emotional responses, the difference between courage and recklessness, between caution and cowardice. Wrench found himself fascinated by the armor's psychological components as much as its technical aspects. So it's been learning your emotional patterns for 23 years. That's an incredibly intimate relationship. More intimate than most Kithrani ever experience with another being, Vera said quietly, then seemed to realize what she'd revealed. I mean, the neural bonding is very thorough. Right, Wrench said, filing away that interesting admission for later consideration. Well, the good news is that most of the damage is to the physical matrix rather than the neural pathways. The bad news is that regrowing biometallic tissue takes time and very precise environmental conditions. How much time? 3 days minimum, maybe 4 if the organic components don't take to the synthetic grafts immediately. Wrench looked up at her. You're welcome to stay in the base guest quarters during the process. Vera's expression showed clear reluctance. I prefer to remain with the armor during repairs. In the workshop? Vera, this place isn't exactly comfortable. It's noisy, smells like industrial solvents, and I'll be working around the clock. Nevertheless. Wrench studied her face, noting the tension around her eyes that suggested this wasn't just preference but necessity. Okay. I can set up a cot in the storage area if you want to stay close. But I have to ask, is this about not trusting me with the armor, or about not being able to be separated from it? Vera was quiet for such a long time that Wrench thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Both, she admitted. The armor and I have never been apart for more than a few hours. I am uncertain what that separation might feel like. Looking at this formidable warrior trying to hide what amounted to separation anxiety, Wrench felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with the workshop's atmospheric recyclers. Well, he said gently, I guess we'll figure it out together. By the second day of repairs, Wrench had developed a profound respect for Kithrani bioengineering and an equally profound concern for Vera's psychological state. She hadn't left the workshop for more than 20 minutes at a time, hovering near the armor like a worried parent watching over a sick child. The neural growth matrix is responding well to the synthetic grafts, Wrench reported, adjusting the environmental controls on his improvised biochamber. But I'm seeing some interesting anomalies in the emotional resonance patterns. Vera moved closer to examine his displays, close enough that Wrench caught the faint scent of something like ozone and metal that seemed to cling to her skin. What kind of anomalies? The armor's been adapting to psychological stress, Wrench explained, pointing to the readouts. Look at these neural pathway formations around the chest area. They're not standard defensive circuits. They're comfort responses. Vera's expression tightened. The armor learns to provide psychological support during extended periods of isolation. How extended are we talking about? 23 years of exile tends to require significant emotional stabilization, Vera replied with the flat tone of someone stating an uncomfortable fact. Wrench stopped his calibrations and looked at her directly. Vera, are you telling me you've been alone for over 2 decades? No clan, no family, no friends. Exile means separation from all social bonds, she said matter-of-factly. The armor became my only reliable companion. That's... Wrench struggled for words that wouldn't sound condescending or pitying. That's a long time to go without any kind of support system. It is the consequence of my choices, Vera replied, but Wrench caught the slight tremor in her voice that suggested the isolation had taken a greater toll than she wanted to admit. Their conversation was interrupted by alarms blaring throughout the base. Emergency lights bathed the workshop in harsh red as Commander Walsh's voice echoed through the comm system, all personnel to defensive positions. We have incoming hostiles on approach Vector 7. Wrench's hands moved automatically to secure his equipment while his mind processed the tactical situation. Vera, you need to get to the bunkers with the other civilians. I am not a civilian, she interrupted, moving toward her armor with predatory purpose. And my armor is not yet functional for combat. Then you definitely need to get to safety, Wrench insisted. Whatever's coming, you can't fight it without proper protection. Vera's laugh was sharp and humorless. The hostiles are likely the same raiders who damaged my armor 3 days ago. They followed me here, which means they know exactly who they're looking for. Through the workshop's viewport, Wrench could see sleek Kithrani attack craft dropping out of hyperspace, their organic curves bristling with weapons that looked grown rather than manufactured. The lead ship broadcast a message in musical Kithrani that his translation software struggled to parse. What are they saying? He asked. They demand the surrender of the exile who has corrupted herself through contact with human technology, Vera translated grimly. They offer to spare the base if you deliver me to them. Wrench felt something cold settle in his stomach. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, Vera replied, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely disapprove of his response. But it would be more practical to complete my armor repairs first. The biogrowth process needs 12 more hours minimum, Wrench said, his mind racing through alternatives. But maybe I can jury-rig a temporary solution. Working with desperate efficiency, Wrench began connecting backup power systems to the armor's damaged sections while Vera provided guidance about neural interface protocols. The makeshift repairs wouldn't restore full functionality, but they might provide enough protection and enhancement for combat. This is insane, Wrench muttered as he spliced fiber optic cables into organic neural conduits. I'm basically performing battlefield surgery on a centuries-old alien artifact while under fire. You are saving both our lives, Vera corrected, stepping into the partially repaired armor. The biometallic surfaces flowed around her like living water, though Wrench could see gaps where his temporary repairs couldn't fully compensate for the missing tissue. The armor hummed to life, its bioluminescent patterns brightening as it synced with Vera's neural patterns. She moved experimentally, testing the range of motion and responsiveness. 60% functionality, she reported. Not optimal, but sufficient. The base shuddered as the first enemy weapon struck the defensive shields. Through the comm system, Wrench could hear tactical chatter as human forces scrambled to respond to an attack they hadn't expected. Vera, Wrench said, grabbing his emergency kit and a plasma rifle, I'm coming with you. You are not a warrior, she protested. No, but I know every maintenance tunnel and emergency system on this base, Wrench replied. And if that armor fails during combat, you're going to need someone who can perform field repairs under fire. Vera studied his face for a moment, her alien features showing an expression he couldn't quite read. Very well, she said finally. But stay close. The armor's protective field can extend to cover you if necessary, but only at close range. As they moved through the base's corridors toward the sounds of battle, Wrench found himself marveling at how different Vera seemed when armored. The vulnerable, isolated exile had transformed into something magnificent and deadly, her movements fluid and purposeful. Wrench, she said as they approached the main defensive positions, if we survive this engagement, I want you to know, your willingness to risk yourself for my equipment's integrity is unprecedented. Just doing my job, Wrench replied, checking his weapon's charge level. No, Vera said, turning to look at him with those intense alien eyes. You are doing far more than that. The battle was about to begin, but Wrench found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, he was about to discover what it meant to be more than just the guy who fixed things when they broke. The battle for Forward Operating Base Titan lasted 6 hours and left Wrench with a new appreciation for both Kithrani combat prowess and the terrifying efficiency of properly motivated biometallic armor. Even at 60% functionality, Vera moved through the enemy raiders like a force of nature, her partially repaired suit adapting to each tactical situation with an intelligence that bordered on prescient. Behind you! Wrench shouted, spotting a raider flanking their position in the base's main corridor. Vera spun with inhuman speed, her armor's neural interfaces translating thought into action faster than any human reflexes could match. The raider's plasma blast sparked harmlessly off her enhanced shielding while her return fire eliminated the threat with surgical precision. Your tactical awareness is impressive for a non-combatant, she observed, pausing to let Wrench catch up. Video games and paranoia, Wrench replied, checking his rifle's power levels. Plus 8 years of watching Marines work. You pick things up. The fighting had driven them into the base's lower levels, where Wrench's knowledge of maintenance systems gave them a significant advantage. They used service tunnels to outflank enemy positions and accessed emergency controls to seal off sections behind retreating raiders. There, Vera said, indicating a cluster of enemy signals on her armor's tactical display. The command group. If we can eliminate their leadership, the remaining forces will likely withdraw. Or fight to the death in a desperate final assault, Wrench pointed out. I'm not expert on Kithrani military psychology, but these guys seem pretty committed to their cause. They are fanatics, Vera agreed. But also pragmatists. Without leadership, they will retreat to regroup rather than waste their lives on a failed assault. The final confrontation took place in the base's main hangar, where the remaining raiders had taken defensive positions among the parked vehicles and equipment. Vera's armor adapted to the environment, its camouflage functions blending her with the shadows while its enhanced strength allowed her to use the machinery as improvised weapons. Wrench found himself providing technical support, using his knowledge of the hangar's systems to control lighting, gravity fields, and atmospheric controls to give Vera tactical advantages. When her armor's temporary repairs began failing under combat stress, he performed field maintenance under fire, his hands steady despite the plasma bolts sizzling overhead. The left shoulder actuator is seizing, Vera reported during a brief lull in the fighting. Neural response time is degrading. Got it, Wrench replied, pulling out his emergency kit. Hold still for 30 seconds. Working with desperate speed, he replaced burned-out interface connections while Vera provided cover fire. The intimacy of performing delicate repairs on her armor while she wore it was unlike anything he'd experienced, his hands moving across surfaces that responded to her thoughts and emotions while she trusted him completely with her life. "Better?" he asked, sealing the emergency patches. "Much," Vera replied, flexing her armored fingers experimentally. "Your field repair techniques are intuitive." The battle concluded with the raiders' withdrawal, leaving the base damaged but intact. As the emergency lights faded and normal operations resumed, Wrench found himself alone with Vera in the hangar's aftermath, surrounded by the debris of combat and the lingering smell of plasma discharge. "The armor held," Vera said, running her hands over the temporary repairs that had kept her alive. "Your work saved both of us." "Just glad I could help," Wrench replied, then realized she was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen before. "What? No one has ever touched my armor except me," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that suggested the admission was significant. "In 23 years of wearing it, I have performed all maintenance, all repairs, all modifications alone." "Well, I guess that's what happens when you're in exile," Wrench said carefully, sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. "Even before my exile, the armor was mine alone to tend," Vera continued. "Kithrani warriors do not share the care of their bonded equipment. It would be intimate beyond what our culture permits." Wrench felt his understanding shift as the implications hit him. "So when you let me repair it?" "I trusted you with something no one has ever been permitted to touch," Vera finished. "The armor is not merely equipment. It is part of me, an extension of my body and mind. Allowing another to work on it is intimate," Wrench completed, understanding flooding through him. "Yes." Vera moved closer, her armored form somehow managing to convey vulnerability despite its imposing presence. "And when you worked on it while I wore it, when your hands moved across its surface while it was bonded to my neural patterns. I was basically touching you," Wrench realized, his face warming as he understood what their repair sessions had really meant from her perspective. "More than touching," Vera corrected softly. "You were caring for the part of me that has kept me alive and sane through decades of isolation. You treated it with respect, with understanding, with—" She paused, searching for words. "With love." The hangar fell quiet except for the distant sounds of base personnel conducting damage assessments. Wrench looked at this fierce warrior who had just admitted something that clearly terrified her more than any combat situation. "Vera," he said carefully, "what happens now? The raiders will be back, probably with reinforcements. You can't stay here without putting everyone at risk." "I know," she replied. "I have been thinking about alternatives." "Such as?" "There are others like me," she said thoughtfully. "Kithrani who question the old ways, humans who seek alternatives to constant conflict. What if we established something new? A place where both species could work together without the constraints of military hierarchy or clan politics." Wrench felt his pulse quicken with something that might have been excitement. "You're talking about going independent. Setting up our own operation. Your technical skills combined with my knowledge of Kithrani technology could be formidable," Vera agreed. "We could offer services to both sides, neutral ground for those tired of the endless fighting." "It would be dangerous," Wrench warned. "Both governments would view us as potential threats." "More dangerous than staying here waiting for the raiders to return with superior numbers," Vera countered. Wrench considered the proposition, weighing the risks against the possibilities. "We'd need a ship, supplies, startup capital." "I know where to acquire all of those things," Vera said with what might have been a smile. "The raiders who attacked us today will no longer be needing their equipment." 3 weeks later, Wrench found himself aboard the salvaged raider vessel they'd renamed Haven's Grace, watching Vera perform routine maintenance on her now fully repaired armor. The biometallic suit gleamed under the ship's artificial lighting, its neural pathways glowing with healthy luminescence. "The repairs have integrated perfectly," she reported, though she made no move to put the armor back on. "The enhanced neural pathways you suggested have improved response time by 12%. Glad to hear it, Wrench replied, looking up from the engine diagnostic he was running. Though I notice you're not wearing it. I am, experimenting with separation periods, Vera admitted. Learning to exist independently of the armor's psychological support systems. How's that going? Terrifying, she said honestly. But also liberating. For the first time in decades, I am experiencing emotions that are entirely my own rather than filtered through biometallic neural interfaces. Wrench saved his diagnostic data and moved to sit beside her on the ship's makeshift bench. And what do your unfiltered emotions tell you? Vera looked at him with those intense alien eyes, her expression showing a vulnerability that the armor would never have permitted. They tell me that trust is more valuable than protection, that connection is worth the risk of vulnerability, and that allowing someone to care for the most important parts of yourself is not weakness, it is courage. She reached out tentatively, her fingers tracing the outline of his chest where his heart beat steadily beneath human skin and synthetic fabric. Is this where humans keep feelings? She asked, her voice soft with wonder. Some of them, Wrench replied, covering her hand with his own. The ones that matter most. Then I believe I am learning to be more human than Kithrani, Vera said, her touch lingering against his heartbeat. Because the feelings I carry for you have become the most important part of who I am. Outside their converted ship, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns while two exiles discovered that sometimes the most crucial repairs weren't to armor or engines, but to hearts that had been isolated for far too long. Haven Station was still just a dream sketched on data tablets and discussed over late-night cups of synthetic coffee, but it felt real in the space between them. A future built on trust, understanding, and the revolutionary idea that two people from different worlds could create something better than either had known alone. You know, Wrench said, watching the way starlight caught the metallic threads in Vera's tattoos, I've been thinking about our business plan for Haven Station. Oh. Vera's hand remained against his chest, her fingers seeming to trace the rhythm of his heartbeat. What conclusions have you reached? We're going to need a bigger workshop, Wrench grinned. Because I have a feeling we're going to be doing a lot more than just armor repairs. Vera's expression shifted to something that might have been hope mixed with determination. Rebuilding lives requires different tools than rebuilding equipment. Good thing I've always been better at improvising solutions than following standard procedures, Wrench replied. Besides, the best repairs happen when you understand what something was meant to be, not just what it is. As their ship continued its journey toward the coordinates where Haven Station would rise from salvaged metal and shared dreams, Wrench realized that the most important thing he'd ever fixed wasn't biometallic armor or plasma weapons or atmospheric processors. It was the connection between two beings who had learned that trust was worth more than protection, and that the strongest armor was built from understanding rather than isolation. The workshop that would become the heart of Haven Station was still just empty space waiting to be filled. But in the quiet moments between stars, two mechanics of different species were already beginning the most important repair work of their lives, healing the damage that years of conflict and loneliness had inflicted on hearts that had almost forgotten how to trust. And in the months that followed, when other exiles and refugees and dreamers arrived at their unlikely sanctuary, they would find that the best workshop in the galaxy wasn't known for its technical expertise or its advanced equipment, but for the simple revolutionary idea that sometimes the most profound repairs happen when someone finally dares to touch what has never been touched before.